Today is our first webinar in a three-part series for buyer education. And this one is specifically what nobody tells you about new construction and condo resales in New York City. And we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour talking about, these specific types of properties. And then we'll leave it at the end for 10, 15 minutes to ask questions. Like I said, you can put questions in the chat if that is helpful. I'm the founder of Realty Collective, Victoria Alexander, a boutique real estate firm that has tried to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate brokers. And I think doing this thing called restorative real estate that I've been practicing for many years and now just sort of evolving the language around it. And I'm doing this class today with two people I trust very completely on these deals, which is Amy and Christine. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Christine, you want to jump off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Wong. I'm a real estate attorney. I do residential real estate in the New York City area. And this is all I do all day, every day. Um, I have literally been in everyone's shoes. I've owned co-op, I've owned a condo, I've owned a house, I've sold a co-op, I've sold a condo. I have very reluctantly been a landlord. Um, and every odd, quirky thing that has happened, I feel happened to me. So I really take that experience to make sure that my clients don't feel any of the stress or confusion that I felt when I was going through all of that. My goal is to make this closing process as boring as possible for you.
Hey, Amy, take it away.
I love that. So I'm Amy Ruiz. I work at Citizens Bank. I am a residential lender. So I do 1 to 4 unit lending in and around the city. And so I am doing condos, co-ops, multifamily, single family every single day. This is all that I do. And like Christine, I am here to anticipate what can possibly go wrong, figure it out, and deal with it on the front end so that you have the smoothest, easiest path possible for your financing so that you can get to the closing table.
Great. Thank you guys. And I already introduced myself. So great. Today's the in-between of the horror story and the sales pitch. Because when you're walking into any of these properties, you need to understand that the person there is representing the seller. You need to figure out who is going to be representing you. And that is hopefully this team of amazing women, because these are the three people you need in New York City to close a deal. So let's focus on, this is the overview of what we're going to be going over today. And the first thing we like to cover is, so everybody likes to go on Street Easy and start looking for property, but really, especially with new construction, the most important thing to do is start talking to your financial or your mortgage professional and getting the finance piece locked down. So Amy, tell us what do you look at when we're kicking things off and someone specifically has said, I want to be in a condo and maybe possibly new construction.
Yep. So I will always ask up front, are there any particular buildings that you are eyeballing? Because that is helpful to know. Because then that gives me a lot of information about, how long, when are they projecting that we're going to be starting closings? And then I like to tack some time onto that. It lets me know, how many of those units are already in contract. Is it zero? Is it a big building? Is it a little building? All of those things sort of matter. Are there preferred lenders in this building? So there's a lot of different things that are going on when I'm looking at someone and vetting them for new development. What we are looking for. So pre-sale is how many units in that new building are under bona fide contract, and are they under contracts to investors, so people who are buying it and planning on renting it out, or are they under contract to people buying first or second homes? That matters from a risk perspective to a lender, and so that is something that we're looking at. If pre-sale is not met, pre-sale is defined as 50% of the building. So that's very easy to meet in a small building. When you've got a building with 70 units, that's a very different animal. And all of those early units are going to be closed by exception. So then I'm looking at your finances to see whether or not you would be qualifying for an exception. What that means is that you are strong enough to offset risk. It means you have reserves, you have good credit, a lower debt to income ratio, and those sorts of things. So I will look at those things up front and say, you are a good candidate for this building, or I'm going to say, you know what, we need to look elsewhere. And then, once we have figured out where you're buying and kind of what their time frame is for closing, like I said, we tack on some time for that, but we also talk about all the different ways that we can manage your rate lock, whether that's through extensions, whether that's through a long-term lock. We've got a lot of different options, and so we're going to look at what is going to be the best fit for you. Every developer is going to work with preferred lenders. What that means is you are free to apply with whomever you want, okay? That you do not have to use one of their preferred lenders, whether Citizens is on the list or not, right? Because there's buildings that I work in and there's buildings that I don't, right? But someone will come to me. I can still do the loan. You can still do the loan with someone else. But what that means is if the other lender, who is not a preferred lender, turns the loan down because of the building, then they're going to want you to use one of their preferred lenders. It's a protection for them. Um, and then requalification. Yeah. So, this is sort of the last piece is it, excuse me. Buying a new development is a lot of times a very long runway. You can be in contract for 6 months, 9 months, a year, if things get delayed. And so what happens is we have to keep all of your documents fresh during that time. So we are, keeping your credit updated. We are updating your income. We are updating your assets. If you lose your job, if you get a job, all of that stuff matters. And so we are going to be kind of in constant contact throughout that loan process, and making sure that everything is, as it needs to be in order for you to close that loan. So it's a long road.
So what I'm hearing is that, oh, somebody's coming in. So what I'm hearing is that, okay, I came and I saw this beautiful new building, but there isn't a lot of, it's been on the market for like 2 weeks. They only have
Yep.
something called a temporary certificate of occupancy, even possibly, right? And so
Yep.
that means that a lot, if it has, 10 units and there's not only like one in contract, we need to get 50%, so 5 of the 10 in contract before closings can start happening in the building, right? And so that might take a long
Typically.
time, right?
Yeah.
Like it might take 3 months, it might take 6 months, it could take a year. So much can happen that's out of our control. Like we could start another war. There's so many things that affect this timeline that are out of the buyer's control, right? And I think that that also is about, the rate lock as well is that, there's so many things that can happen. You could get a lock today, a quote today on a rate, and it can completely change in a year. We've seen how rates have
Yep.
changed, from year to year over the last 5 years pretty drastically. So I think that's the other thing. And so then the preferred lender is just the in-house lender. When you go there, they're giving you a sheet of paper and saying, this is the person that we know can close in this building because they're probably tied to their underlying mortgage or financing for when they did the construction loan to build the property. And so they want to have a stopgap in case, you can't get a loan on your own. Did I understand all that correctly?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You sure did.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Just laying it out there for people because I think all of a sudden
Yes.
I was like, okay, so why are these things important? Okay, so I think that for me, these are the things that I wish, every buyer knew when they were going to like, who is the sponsor? Is it someone that this is their first building or is this their fifth building? I like to do some research and do some Googling. And you can figure out, does this person have a bunch of lawsuits? Have they changed their LLC name for every building for some reason? Like, what are the issues and flag who the sponsor really is? You want someone that has a track record that has done this. This isn't their first, rodeo, and that they're building quality products, right? I'm going to let Christine talk what the warranty covers because that seems like a legal question. And is the building budget realistic? That's also something I think you could probably answer. And who controls the board? So the sponsor controls the board until you reach a certain threshold, and that is 50%, right, Christine?
It There is now some variation. It will
Oh,
depend from building to building. Yeah,
okay, great. Well, do you want to talk about what the warranty covers?
sure. So the short answer is everything is going to be in the offering plan, which, used to be a fat book, like a literal book, that the sponsor's agent would hand over to you. Um, and I would get the dubious pleasure of reading through it to make sure that the building is set up and structured in a way that makes sense for you, the buyer. Nowadays, you just get a series of increasingly large PDFs, but with the same result. The offering plan lays out how the condo is structured and formed. And it is basically the sponsor's offer to buyers, right? What are they offering? They're offering a building that has 20 units, that has a pool, that has a gym, that has parking, right? All of these things. And part of that will talk about the warranty and how long of a warranty there is and what exactly it covers and doesn't cover. And that in the event that you buy and there is some issue, let's say you feel that the plumbing is not, up to code or, operating the way it should, there will be a procedure and a timeline under which you can make objections, that you can argue that the sponsor needs to make repairs and deliver. And it's fairly detailed. More and more nowadays, reference to that warranty is being included in the contract. Because of things like hardwood floors and slight discoloration in like the color of the wood. Things like that. If you have marble countertops, marble is not completely uniform. So there will be certain carve-outs in the warranty about, natural products and what that means or doesn't mean, and what variations there could be in color, texture, things like that. Um, the offering plan will also set out board control. So when the sponsor first offers the building, they own all of the building and all of the units. So if it's 20 units, they own all 20. And then over time, as people buy, right, the ownership percentage of the sponsor decreases. The offering plan will set out for how many years the sponsor gets control of the board. Meaning, if there are 5 board seats, right, do they get 3 of the 5? Do they get 5 of the 5? At what point do they go down to 1? What point are they have 0? And what does it mean to control the board, right? That means the sponsor gets to vote on all aspects of the building, the budget and whether common charges increase, whether to change amenities. So are they going to change the hours of the gym? Are they going to close out the pool? Whether or not to allocate to the budget other resources. Are they going to hire 4 doormen or only one? Are they going to take away the porter? Are they going to do annual landscaping or semi-annual landscaping? All of the things that the board would normally do in running, maintaining the building, including hiring, deciding who gets to or how much insurance there is for the building, staff and whether staff are going to be part of the New York City Union. All of these decisions are board decisions. So if a sponsor controls the board for 5 years, that means even if though you're an owner, they are making all the decisions regarding budget and everything else for those 5 years. And you, as an individual owner, are going to go along with the flow. If the sponsor only owns for 2 years, then after this 2 years, there's an independent election and other owners can sit on the board, and then you can vote and change whatever you want to change. So you could change who's the insurance. You could hire and fire staff. You could change the budget and say, okay, now we want to spend more money. We want to update the gym. We want to update the garden. You can make a lot of decisions that previously the sponsor was the sole decision maker. So it's important for you to know, if you're buying into new development, exactly how much say you're going to have and when you would start having that authority.
Um, generally though, I think you have what, 5 years to sue to the developer if there's a structural problem with the building. There are timelines on sort of what you're allowed to go back. I think it's 2 years for mechanical and plumbing. But if the building's falling down, you only have 5 years to sue. So you better do it within that window. But these are things that hopefully will not happen. But it's good to know so that you are aware, because within like my own development where I bought, there was all 5 units had leaking, and we all just decided to fix it. One person wanted us to all do a lawsuit together. And for many of us just felt like, okay, this we're just gonna just fix the problem and move forward. It was easier than suing the spot the developer. Um, so how to read a building. Okay. Everybody says, oh, we don't need to do an inspection until you're already in contract. I always encourage everybody to get an inspection for new construction before they sign the contract because I have a handful of inspectors that will come and talk to you about the materials, right? If you are using, if they're like, oh, this is sheetrock, this is plaster, this is spray foam, this is what's that stuff? EPFs or whatever that's on the outside that's not real stucco. It's fake stucco and it's really shitty. Part of my house is made out of it. You want to know what the quality of the material is because that should also inform your how much you're willing to pay for it, right? There is a certain level that you're like, oh, they everything is gilded in gold and marble in here. That's going to feel more, have more value possibly than something that's made of a bunch of cheap things. So understanding, and especially at this point, you can see sometimes behind the walls, things are still in motion and understand the types of brand names that they're picking. Are they going for the cheapest of the cheap, or are they buying things that have real legs to last? And so I always encourage people to, yes, you could try and figure it out yourself, or and I look around and I if something feels cheap, it usually is cheap. That's how, if it looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So that's a good rule of thumb here. But then having somebody in that's an expert come in and walk you through and explain to you the mechanicals, how the building works, how they set things up, and that's what I like and expect for inspectors to do for my clients, is really educational, and it helps you feel more confident before you sign the contract. So it is really important to understand. And like I said, it feeds into doing your digging and research on the sponsor, right? If they have a bunch of lawsuits and a bunch of buildings, and you can drive by those buildings, do they look like did they build them 5 years ago? Can you drive by and do they look like they're not aging well? That's something to think about before you move forward with this person. If they look like they're aging well, you'll have more confidence feeling like that your property will do the same. Um, we talked about this a little bit, right? Um, the handoff when sponsor releases. So I think this is between you and me, Christine, right? The delay play. What sponsors do when units don't sell, and litigation history. Christine, I'll let you jump in where you feel like you want to talk about this. I feel like the delay playbook is something that is an interesting tactic, right?
Right. I mean, again, right, when the sponsor owns units or parking spaces or storage, right, they always reserve the right to rent. So if they're not getting the price they want, they might end up renting for a period, and then relisting, right? So what that could mean is you could own, and we could be 6, 7 years, down the road, and sponsor could still own a certain number of units. And occasionally it'll pop up on the market again. So, and it's always kind of unusual. People expect sponsor units to come on the market when a building is brand new, not 6, 7 years later. But, that happens. But then you also have to kind of understand that your building becomes partially a rental building because now they've rented, right? Instead of those 3 units being sold, they're renting it. And most rentals are year long. So you're going to get a little bit of a turnover as tenants kind of come and go. Um, and whatever the rental price is could also have an effect on the value of your property. So
Yeah.
you want to keep that in mind. Um,
It can
you know,
also affect, though, being able to sell in the future, right? If they have more than a certain amount that are being rented, it might
mhm,
be hard for a future buyer to get a loan in your building if you want to be able to sell it, right?
right.
And then also, there might be restrictions on the buyers, but might not necessarily have restrictions on the sponsor on renting. Like there's a building in Red Hook that the sponsor can rent out the units, but the buyers cannot for like the first 5 years that they own them or something. And so if their life changes, the whole point of buying a condo for some people is some flexibility, unlike a co-op. And this might really affect if they sponsor still has control, how they can, rent moving forward.
Exactly. So, one of the things I always ask about, when I'm dealing with new development is to find out how many units have closed, how many units are in contract or in negotiations for contract. So you can kind of get an idea of not only the most accurate number, but kind of what is the pace, right? How are things looking? And whether sponsor is holding back any units. Sometimes a sponsor will hold back one or two units for affiliates of the sponsor or family or something. And then you kind of know that there will kind of perpetually be, one or two units. Also keep in mind, if a sponsor still owns one or two units, often that means they still get one seat on the board. So that means they get one of the crucial voting seats on the board for all the decisions of the building.
Mm. And so when is the sponsor get release of control? Like what triggers that?
Usually, what triggers it is they can either relinquish it or if their ownership drops below a certain amount. Um, so it used to be 50%. I've seen buildings where it's 40 or 30%, or the earlier of 30% or 5 years or 4 years, some amount of time. Right. It depends on the size of the building and I think their sense of how quickly, things are going to move and what other uses or, potential uses they might have for the space. Um,
Okay, so
but
that happened, right? And so as somebody that's never been on a board before, I own a single family house. So tell me what happened. What should I be demanding at the first board meeting to help make sure that we set ourselves up correctly?
so I mean, there's going to be an election, right? And anyone can either nominate themselves or be nominated. And you're going to want what's called an independent board. So even if the sponsor still owns one unit and they get one seat, you want to make sure the remaining seats, you want to know how many seats are available, right? Some boards are 5, some are 7, some are 9. You want to make sure all the remaining seats are filled with people unaffiliated with the board, and ideally people that you feel, have the best interests of the building at heart. Um, and that everyone's kind of willing to take a look at the building. Like someone's got to be willing to talk to the accountant and look at the finances. Someone's got to be willing to look at all the agreements and find out how much are you paying for insurance of the building? How much are you paying for staff? Like, what's going on? Is there retail or is there commercial space on the first floor? And is that tenant paying rent that makes sense? Like, are they, I don't know, a spa and using like thousands of dollars of water every month, but we only charge them $100 a month for their water fee? Like, you want to start be willing to look at kind of the details to make sure that the residents are not paying more than their fair share of what it takes to run and maintain the building, and that everyone is happy with the vendors, contractors, people that they're using. Are you getting the best price? Are you getting the best service for the needs of your building?
So it sounds Amy's shaking her head yes a lot about this water bill. So I guess there's a lot of spas not paying their fair share
Right.
in these condo buildings or other businesses, maybe some
Right.
restaurants,
Yeah, I
dry
see the
cleaning.
budgets. I see the budgets and yeah, that's very important and also making sure that you have, like good tenants in those commercial spaces and that they pay their rent on time and like there's a lot of things that go into that. So yes, having very active board members is really important because it's going to affect you because if it's not, it's going to get lopsided and it's going to come back on you. So
Mhm.
And I would say like being on the board is like a community service, right? It's that this is the community of people that you're in the building with. It is work, right? And you want people that are engaged because when the people are like, oh, I'm going to take a board seat and they don't do what they've signed up to do, it could be really detrimental to the rest of the building. If somebody's not like double, like if I'm an insurance person and I live in the building, I should be with my expertise helping guide us to make sure we have the right and best insurance products, and not letting things slip through the cracks. So you want people that are bring their expertise. So for the benefit of the building, because we all want the building to appreciate and do well. And if we can get a handle on what our expenses in our budget, we can keep expenses low in from the common charges perspective and make sure that our building stays attractive to future buyers, because that's what you're trying to make sure you have is if you really mess up the budget, then you have to do something called an assessment, and you're not your budget's not meeting what your expenses are, and your expenses are going out the window. You really are setting yourself up to decreasing your property value. So that's why it's super important you pick people that are really engaged, because you want and are sharing their expertise and realizing that they don't have 10,000 other obligations on their plate, or that they're going to do this community service is their civic duty to the building, to sign up. And people have to take turns doing it. You can't expect somebody to do it for 10 years and realize that they're not getting paid for it. So,
Exactly.
but everybody should do it. If you live in a condo or a co-op, you should serve. So, what's actually on the table? When you're buying in new construction, and I think you have less of these things really play into condo resales, which we really haven't talked about, which we should, um, is that there's a lot of negotiating. And depending on if things are moving, or if you are in a leveraged position where like you're the last unit that will get them over the 50% to be able to start closings, you might be able to negotiate more than, people that were in the middle or the first or second person, right? Um, Closing cost credits, asking for a credit for your maintenance, for some of the fees involved that you don't want to pay. They're going to try to push not just the transfer taxes onto the buyer, but also sometimes there are legal fees and some filing fees, and they're going to try to get you to pay for them. And it depends on where the market is, right? If there is a real lack of inventory, they're going to have the upper hand. If there's a flood of inventory and not that many buyers are going to have the upper hand. Who knows what's happening right now? It seems like every neighborhood differs. Because and price points. I really think that honestly, the things in the lower price point have there it's a seller's market, and things on the higher price point are it's a buyer's market. Um, from what I can tell, has been going on the last 2 months. So they're going to try to, and transfer taxes are usually a nice chunk of change. And or yeah, the common charge buy down. So and then trying to negotiate in storage or parking or upgrades. Like I remember when after 2010, really being able to get my buyers a lot of perks. Like they threw in a free storage space. Oh, we were going to pay nothing for the parking space. Like they really wanted to move these units, and um, it was surprising how much we were able to get. I feel like that's happened less and less as the real estate market has just gotten crazier and crazier. Do you guys want to jump in and talk about any of these things from your perspective?
Yes. So I'm seeing, a lot of more quirky, closing costs. Traditionally, sponsors have always been able to shift some of their expenses onto buyers. Transfer taxes being, the most popular. Um, but, I'm seeing things like, the sponsor's legal fee is being paid by the buyer. Um, the buyer's share of the building insurance for year one, because usually it is, everyone paying in the common charges, the annual budget, the condo pays the insurance. In year one, when no one has bought, right, and sponsor owns all the apartments, sponsor pays the insurance. And I'm seeing more and more that they are actually making a pro rata split and asking buyers at closing to pay their share of year one premium.
Interesting.
I'm seeing sponsors ask for a fee of anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000 as a contribution towards sponsors' work in creating the condo and the offering plan. They call that a creation fee for
Oh
the
my
actual
God.
creation of the building. And so it's kind of, it all gets traded like, oh, okay, we're not going to charge you transfer taxes, but I am going to charge you now my legal fee, a creation fee, an insurance fee, your share of the super's apartment. That's very popular. That often the resident manager or the super gets an apartment to live in as part of their compensation. And ultimately, the condo is going to own that apartment as an asset. But until they do, the sponsor owns it, and they're asking all the first time buyers to contribute to that share. So let's say the apartment's $1 million, you're paying a share, right? Whatever your percentage of common interest is, say it's 3% of that $1 million as part of your closing costs. All those numbers start to add up. So it kind of it balances out. Um, and sponsors are getting a little bit more creative in that. And that's why it's important that you have someone like Victoria who's kind of aware of all the quirks to ask when you're negotiating your price so that we know what that universe of extra fees could be.
I'm happy I'm not seeing this in Brooklyn right now, because it
Oh,
would.
it's in there.
I have not seen it, but I actually have to say that I have not had a new construction deal in like in the last year, I would say. There was like a big boom just because of the neighborhoods I'm working in. Like Gowanus had like a real birth, but it was a couple years ago.
Mhm.
And downtown Brooklyn, it's yeah, I haven't seen that many, thankfully, because to me, I'm just going to remind people that the sponsor is actually the real estate developer. So they're just trying to not cut into their bottom profit lines. They want as much profit as possible. So they're trying to push their costs, which would normally be paid by them, onto the buyer, which is wild to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, which has always happened, but now it just seems like it's getting more and more egregious. Or things are getting tighter and tighter. I mean, it gets getting harder and harder to build in New York City and more expensive. So
And sponsors are being more creative now about it. So we
They
just have to
are.
be on the lookout.
yeah.
From a financing perspective, understanding what you're responsible for is really, really important because we have to make sure that you have the cash to close and that you have, sufficient reserves post closing, and just making sure that we're qualifying all of that stuff up front. So it is really critical, that all of this stuff is negotiated and spelled out and stuff. And sometimes it is really common to see those HOA like common charge buy downs. And sometimes that will almost in a way negate some of your like transfer taxes and things that you are picking up. But having all that stuff negotiated well up front by, Victoria, and then when I get it, so that I know exactly what you are responsible for from the get-go is, and we don't get surprises at the end is really important.
Yeah, because you don't want your debt to income ratio changing so much that then, okay, you're not going to qualify for the loan. And so,
Exactly.
but that's why you
Exactly.
have a financing contingency. So if they're trying to throw all these things in last minute, you do have some leverage to be like, this is going to change the whole structure of the deal. And this is not what I use to qualify. And I'm going to lose I have a financing and I'll just flex it. And that's one leverage point we can use. But hopefully out the gate, they're telling us what they're looking for. Um, Okay, so these are some of the closing costs we just talked about. Which one, I guess, is on here that we didn't talk about? Well, two actually. We didn't talk about the mansion tax, which is in the process of changing. And I saw Tina join in because she's been doing her research on this. And then the other is this working capital contribution. So that's something, they usually ask you to pay 2 months of common charges up front so that there is some operating expenses for the building to start running that is now in the bucket, instead of being waiting for you guys to put that in. Who wants to take on the mansion tax? Oh God, me?
You're up.
Oh man, oh man. Well, so the current one I should have refreshed before this because the new one, I'm going to make Tina do it because the one that's here right now is based on anything that's over $1 million. Right now, there's a mansion tax in New York City for anything over $1 million. They're proposing a new one through the Senate, right, Tina? God, where's my article? Wrote a whole article on about it and I don't think I absorbed, but it's not passed yet. So I usually save my brain space for things that are actually going to happen.
Mhm.
Um, Tina, come on. But who remembers the proposal for?
No, it's
Go ahead, there we
it's
go.
a it's tricky. We still don't know 100% where these are at. So um I I'm not I, we don't have the approved numbers on these. Some of these that were proposed were shelved in favor of the
Get a terror
of
attack.
the pied-à-terre tax. So, but the shift is in the sort of like what the current mansion tax brackets are. So everybody thinks of it as being 1%, but it's 1% from a million to from a million to 2 million. There was a proposal that 1% be added to property purchases of $500,000 or more.
Oh,
So but as far as I know, that hasn't been enacted yet. And then the percentages go up as the price goes up. So if you're buying something over $15 million or if you're buying something over $25 million, your mansion tax is at 3.9%. And if that property is a pied-à-terre, then you're also being hit with this new pied-à-terre tax.
which is
So
so wild though, because every article I listened to on the New York Times, it was very confusing on how they were going to actually line up all the information to make sure that, because then people will have to fight it if they get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's the federal government does this right now is, if you're a person who has two residences and you claim that one is your full-time residence, they have ways of tracking to make sure that you are spending the majority of your time in those places. So there are systems in place. Certainly, we live in a kind of surveillance state as it is, but there are ways for them to determine whether someone is using a property as a second home or not, even if that property is a co-op. So I think that a lot of the, hand wringing and pearl clutching, probably actual pearls, because we're talking about the very, very wealthiest in society, is a little bit of a performance in order to make this seem like it'll be harder to enact than it will be. Whether or not it's going to generate enough real money to alter the budget, that I don't know. But I think that a lot of people are like, oh, how will we possibly know if something is somebody's second home or not? Like, we can figure it out.
Yeah.
That's what
And
I thought when I was listening to the New York Times article, and then I was like, but then now that you're saying it, I was like, oh wait, I forgot New York Times.
I
Um,
think that one distinction to make, though, is the mansion tax, as it stands now, is a sliding scale and it's paid by the buyer at closing and
correct.
it's a one-time fee. The pied-à-terre tax, I believe, they're looking to make that an annual tax.
Mhm.
So it's for the duration of your ownership, or at least the initial proposal was.
I know it changed so much, and they only passed the city. We still haven't passed the state.
Right. So,
Right. So.
but I think the hope is that it's going to be kind of a continuous, revenue generator.
That would be really interesting because I think that helps people get away for the scapegoating of, paying no income tax in Florida. Like, oh, all these Florida people leave New York and spend half their year in Florida to avoid the income tax in New York. But if you're going to have to pay this pied-à-terre tax, you're going to get rid of your foothold in
Right.
New York City. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it isn't an illogical proposal. It's just that the wealthiest in society are the ones who will be paying it and are therefore the ones who are fighting it most loudly.
Mhm.
And they're the ones who, people listen to. So I don't think it, and it's interesting that in the real estate industry, the talking points for real estate brokers is that everybody thinks that this is a bad idea. That's simply not true.
Yeah.
But our industry is telling people to tell everybody that.
Yeah. Rebney, they have their mantras. They have their mantra that is, yeah, they repeat in many different ways. So moving on. So we've covered the sponsor units. We talked about transfer tax. There's a percentage, right, Christine, of transfer taxes for New York City and New York State that people should calculate in when they're calculating their.
Yes, yes. So it's 1%, the New York City transfer tax if you're buying something for under 500,000. And over 500,000, it's 1.425%. And then New York State charges 0.4% until you get to, I think, over 3 million. Then it becomes 0.65%. So it's all tracked to your sale price. And if you're close to those thresholds, then you do want to be mindful. That's a reason why a lot of things sell for 2.9 2.85, 2.99. It's because once you cross over to 3, the seller pays, a little bit more transfer tax. And of course, once you cross over to 3, you're paying the 3% mansion and up mansion tax rate instead of the 2 to 3 million% mansion tax rate. So, it all kind of staggers, and you want to be mindful of what your closing costs will be.
I mean, I think the state has an opportunity. That's like, those are so still below 1% there across the state. Um, Opportunity to do something there. I thought it was interesting that so many municipalities came out and talked about the pied-à-terre tax, wanting to induce that in parts of upstate New York, and how it would be really benefit some of these smaller villages. And they were talking about doing it. So it's not just New York City. Where the credits go and where they don't. Okay. Chris, Amy, I'm going to let you talk about lender credits versus sponsor credits.
Perfect. So the lender credit is something that is given to you by the lender. So it is coming out of your closing costs. So let's say that you get a lender credit on your rate. So it's just that much less money that you're coming to the table with. It's credited out of the lender's pocket. Whereas when you have a sponsor credit, that is something that is being credited to you by the sponsor. It's something that has a value. And where we have to be really careful is with sponsor credits. They cannot, and this is pretty rare in new development, but where we have to be careful is making sure that sponsor credits do not exceed your closing costs. So where I have seen that occasionally happen is maybe the sponsor was picking up transfer taxes. It's new building. They need to get that first inventory going. It's an early unit, so they were like, "Yeah, well, we'll pick up the transfer taxes, even though that's usually you." And it's below the mansion tax rate. It's under $1 million, so you're not paying the mansion tax, and we're going to give you 2 years of HOA. Well, suddenly you've got a huge credit that actually exceeds your literal closing costs, and that's when we have to get creative and we're say, okay, how do we use up your lender credit? And then we're looking at what can we put on the CD so that it's you're not, because what you can't have the sponsor contributing to your down payment, and that is the essential happening when that sponsor credit exceeds your actual closing costs. So then we might buy down the rate. We might do a bunch of different things. It's a great problem to have. So we will look at things and figure out creatively how to structure that in a way that's going to benefit you. I don't see it all the time, but occasionally you will see something like that happening. So
I used to
uh,
see it a lot more.
yes, I used to see it more too. I used to see it
I
more
used to
too.
see it
I
a
don't see
lot
it
more
nearly as
too.
much
I
now.
remember trying to negotiate and be like, okay, well, I'm going to have all the down payment, but don't have the money for all the closing costs. How can we make this deal happen? And remember, negotiate. That was like always a nice negotiating point that was there.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is after 2010, after the financial crisis, that there was a lot more leverage for buyers because, it was a lot harder for people to get mortgages.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely true. And I used to even like 2, 3 years ago, I was seeing more of this. I'm not seeing as much of it now where I'm like, oh, what a great problem to have. But it does still happen occasionally. So it's just something to, again, like work with your lender really closely with.
Well, and I think the thing that we're missing here that we don't talk about is really that how this plays up against the appraisal, right? Is that we
Hmm.
still need the property to appraise, and if the credits and the appraisal don't line up as well, then you're going to have a real problem also. So if they're, I don't, I'm trying to it's figure out how I explain that part of it. But I remember that um, I can't put we're all coming off of being sick, so I'm gonna think about how I explain it in a way that is digestible, unless anybody else wants. But so resale closing costs much more affordable, right? You're not getting these transfer taxes in there. You're just basically having similar to what you would be for any other property. They're higher than co-ops, but not as much as 1 to 4 family houses. And it also depends on, which we're not going to cover, I guess. I don't know if we said we were going to talk about new construction taxes for condos. which is the hardest thing because I have a buyer now that's always like, why is this condo's taxes so much more than this condo? I'm like, well, that one was built in the 90s and this one was built in 2020. And so, the tax structure for all these is just, it's based on the rentals and this is a higher end property. And it's honestly, though, so hard to calculate why. And there's no real rhyme or reason to it in some cases, in most cases, especially for condos across the board. You can a little bit make it more nuts and bolts of it around 1 to 4 families if there hasn't been an assessment and if there hasn't, the property hasn't transferred and they haven't done a huge amount of works, they haven't changed it from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 1 or anything like that. That triggers a tax assessment that then they reevaluate what the taxes are. So if you're like looking at 1,400 square foot condos and you're like, why is one this much and this one's the other one? It's just, it's really, you're never going to understand it. But what you can understand is that a lot of the time age comes into it, how old the building is, what credits were available, if they were using a J51 or what's the other one?
421A
421A,
We're
yeah,
talking, yeah.
which aren't, they didn't renew a lot of that.
did not. No.
So we'll see. And that's probably why developers are trying to get you to pay for their lawyer fees and all of the transfer taxes now because they're not getting the tax incentives to build. So the math at closing, walking through real cost sheets. So number isn't a surprise on the day of. And that is something both Amy and Christine will do with you. Okay, this is sort of the timeline. Okay, so the building's halfway done. It usually has something called a TCO, temporary certificate of occupancy. They are working to finalize all that, but they get the offering, as long as the offering plan's out. They have to put out an offering plan that matches the numbers that they're listing the property for. So they can't put the property on the market for $1 million and then list it for 1.5. All of that, those numbers have to be figured out ahead of time. So then while you're putting in the offer in the contract, you do get a mortgage commitment, right? That is going to only last 30 to 60 days. And that's why we need to go back to them once it's closer to the closing day. And also why I think before I was going to remind people, you have to be conservative with your purchasing in this window of time. You cannot go buy a car. You cannot lease a car. You cannot go buy furniture for this house. You cannot make any huge expenses that could possibly lose your financing. So you're going to have this mortgage commitment. Then we're going to wait. And then we're going to go in and they're going to be like, okay, we're ready to do closings. Okay, we're going to go in and look at everything that needs to be finished in your unit so that there gets done before or after the closing. And we will make a list of everything that happens, right? We're going to be like, okay, this is uneven. This cabinet's missing a handle. They didn't install a toilet paper thing. They never sheetrocked here. This wasn't painted. Where's my dishwasher? You're gonna make a list. So that is on record in the contract, everything that's supposed to be done. Because some of these things they will do before the closing, and some might just be on the punch list that get done after the closing when they go back another round. But you need to document every single thing that needs to get done so that the next year you might be chasing them to get these things done, but they're legally required to do them because it was in the punch list. I'm gonna what else has to happen, guys, because that's my job.
Well, so after the punch list, I get the fun of putting together the closing statement, and that's going to show you the flow of funds. So all of the fees that you're paying at closing, right? Your title bill, whether you're paying, the next month's common charges, if there's a move-in deposit. I work all of that out in one closing statement for you to see. And I'm going to list out what checks or wires you need to bring or send at closing. With new construction, we are almost always closing remotely. And by that, I mean the sponsor or the seller doesn't show up. They sign their documents in advance, they mail them. I'll be there. We'll hang out in person. And if you're getting a loan, Amy will send someone. So we'll have our own little party, but there will be no sponsor. We're still going to sign all the documents and go over everything together. But it's my closing statement that will tell you what you need to bring and, what is being paid at closing. Often it will be your common charges for the next month. Sometimes you end up paying the next quarter of taxes, depending on when we close and what's due, so that you probably will not have too many expenses, the first 30 days or so post closing, other than, working out your actual move. But everything else is usually covered. Um, and then, actual closing, like I said, it'll be us on the buy side. We're going to sign all the documents. I'm going to send everything over to the sponsor. And once the sponsor confirms that the wire has hit and or they've received, all the documents that they need, you will be officially closed and keys will be released to you and you'll be a homeowner.
And at this point, as if we did do an inspection in the beginning, I asked then that the inspector comes back and you do have to pay them again. But I think it's worthwhile to walk you through and make sure that everything that they said they were going to do, they actually did, because we're not going to know if they got the right thing that they promised, a year ago that, and we're not experts on that stuff, right? We need someone that understands the mechanics of it. And I always say it's better safe than sorry for that part of it. And so, yes, we do the final walkthrough, which is like another check of the punch list before we go to the closing. I always tell people at this juncture, do not schedule your move on the day of closing. We have done everything in the last however long amount of time that this process has taken to make it as least stressful as possible. That is a stressful scenario. And so you will schedule it the day after, and hopefully you have extended your lease as much as you needed to. Okay, and I see some, oh, and this is not questions, but if you have questions, put them in the chat. We're wrapping up here. That's for the punch list. Okay, we're just gonna jump into questions now. I think we covered as much as we could in an hour. It's so much information, but I think we gave you guys the gist of resale and new construction scenarios that we want to cover. Does anybody want to jump off mute and ask us questions directly? I still see a lot of people on here. I thought I heard someone take themselves off mute. Katya, Grace, Kenny, Laverne.
Thank you so much. It was such a helpful information. I'm like just writing everything down. It's very interesting. But no questions. I feel like I'm learning so much that I have no questions, just learning.
Well, I'm
Okay.
glad you're learning. That's what we want. That's why we have these calls. So now that, we do this because we understand that when you go on Zillow or you go on Street Easy, people are advertising to get in front of you. And it is very important that you do things with intention about who you want to work with. You don't want Zillow and some of the paid Zillow to pick the broker you want to work with, right? Or the lawyer or the bank, right? Because once you put your information in there, you're going to be getting cold calls up the wazoo. And do not do that. I have a list of people to work with, and you call us and talk to us and say, you know what? I talked to Amy and she was great. I want to work with her. I talked to Christine, or, I have a list of questions. What you're going to ask Christine, what you're going to ask Amy to make you feel comfortable about the work relationship. And even if it's not us, be intentional about who you work with, because you spend a lot of time with them and you're relying them, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to you. So you want to like them, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking to each other. You're going to feel like you understand when they're explaining and communicating things to you, that you can comprehend what they're saying, and that you can take advice from them, right? Because you don't want me as your real estate broker if you're not going to listen to anything I say. So you want to feel like, okay, this person has my best interest and they're looking out for me. And I have a lawyer for something right now, and I'm just like, okay, I trust you. Let's do that. That sounds great. That's the kind of relationship you want to have with these people, is that they're giving you their expertise. You understand what they're saying, and then you say, okay, yeah, I'm going to follow your knowledge, because you've been doing this for a really long time. The other part of that is you want to make sure you're picking people that have been doing this for a really long time. I've owned Realty Collective this July 21 years. And so that means I've been doing real estate like 25 years, which makes me feel really old. But also, I've been doing this a really long time. And I have really great relationships with lawyers and mortgage professionals and other brokers. It's really great. I have a deal right now with a broker I've known for 10 years that I've never done a deal with, but we've done other stuff together. So, it's important when you have somebody representing you that they can email other brokers and they're like, "Oh, you guys have done deals together." And that's why I like working with Amy and Christine too. You send out a deal sheet. Christine's like, "Oh, I know this other lawyer oh, we just did a deal last week." Those are the kind of relationships that you want to have and people you want to have on your team. It's one of the most important things. Okay, any other questions now that I've been talking for so long? No. Ugh. Okay, well, we're going to send you some follow-up information with all of our contact info. You can reach out to us and talk to us for free. There's no charge for anything. And also, even if it's not tomorrow that you're going to be ready to buy, if it's like in a year, we want to make sure we set you on the right path for success so that you can reach your goals. And so sometimes it's talking to Amy right out the gate. Okay, what is a bank going to look at and understand what should I hire someone to fix my credit? I didn't know that there was this blemish there. This is a medical thing. I need to fix that, right? Now you have a year, 6 months to a year to fix it. And, maybe it's even longer than that. But you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. And that's why talking to us early on helps us build our relationships, helps us get you prepared so you can pull the cord and get things going when you are ready and not being like, oh my God, I should have fixed my credit 6 months ago and gotten this thing removed that has been damaging it, right? Because that's sometimes really easy. Like, oh, this $100 from Verizon when I closed out my account that they've been chasing because I moved out of that apartment from 5 years ago is still dinging me. It's an easy fix sometimes. So, ladies, anything you want to add to the end of this?
Just that I'm always here, same as Victoria and Amy. I'm always happy to answer questions. Things are always changing and moving. And so, if anyone wants to call and ask, have you done any work in this building? Do you know anything? Like, someone had this strange phrase that I don't understand. Um, Always happy to talk about it.
Likewise, we do a lot of new development lending in Brooklyn and just around Manhattan as well. And, so a lot of the projects I'm familiar with, and if not, I can usually find something out, that you might need to know or is helpful for you on the financing side. If you want to just kind of have a conversation about what can you do to prepare for, being ready to purchase and sign a contract in 6 to 9 months or next year. Those are great conversations to have. And so, yeah, my door is always open.
Okay, and we're having two more. Gosh, I should have put the information on here. Who knows what the two other classes that we're doing? We're doing a specific one. The next specific one we're doing is on co-ops, and it is in June. And then we're doing one on 1 to 4 family houses in September because I feel like everybody goes away in July and August. And so we will send that information to you guys after this with on the follow-up email so that you can sign up for the next ones. Okay, and I'm going to let everybody go. It's 6:01. I'm staying on time. Thank you guys, ladies. Feel better, Amy and Christine.
Bye,
Right.
everyone. Nice to have met you.
Thank you.